Welcome back to video 5 of our evaluation series. And I wanted to cover under this particular video some of the templates that we were talking about in the last. I mentioned that I want to go through some site allocation templates, some address pool allocation templates for IPs within the subnet. But I also want to cover the things like information templates and user definable fields, how we apply those and where they're applied throughout the application. And then real quick, some device types and naming policies. And once we get through with those, I want to proceed with looking through the various import capabilities and or cloning, setting up some of the default structure, the default policies, things that we're going to use moving forward, and then show you some simple ways that we can export it and then duplicate that data, re-import it, and we'll go through some more advanced topics in terms of setting up the imports, doing some network discovery, and some other things in the next videos. So first of all, to start with, under the tools, there's a number of categories, but first we want to look at device types. Device types to us or to you are your user-definable way of looking at IP addresses and the type of device that's utilizing the IP. It is fully customizable so that you can go in and do things like, firewall if you want to be as generic as you want to. These can all be excluded from discovery as well if you do any type of reclaim. It's already a duplicate here, so let's do Windows Server, as a server type. And you'll see here, of course, I just added to the list. Now, the importance to this is that you can create your own custom device types. So if you want to think of this IP as a Windows 2019 server or a Linux Red Hat or a switch of some type, a router, you certainly can. But you can also set up different policies around these different device types in terms of naming policies. So a few things that you want to typically do if you have the ability, you can set up any type of naming policy for devices. So I might want to say that this is WinSRV, and insert below this, I want some type of zero field incrementer. That's going to give me just kind of a category naming that's going to generate some type of unique naming policy for a device when you first select it that can be overwritten at the type of selection. So if you don't know the name at the time you add the device, we could assume this. Or if we import a Windows Server type, we can tell it to apply a naming policy, which would pull in the next available in the incrementers for it. And there's other types of information we could do here too, such as the IP address hyphenated or zero filled and others. So a couple of different formats that you can tweak around with, but the idea here is that some of the generic ones you should go ahead or might want to go ahead and set up some type of custom naming. So I'm going to do that just real quick and on a couple of these that I might be working with as we move through this. And I'm going to do IPv4 separated there. Let's just do PC. All right. Now, aside from that, we have then what we call information templates. And the information template purpose is to hold a group of user-definable fields, and we then apply those templates to containers, network subnets, and other areas and objects throughout the application. What I recommend you do in each or any case here is I recommend that you create at least one for pretty much all of the different structure and that you're going to have throughout the application, whether you use it or not, in the event that you maybe come back and assign it later in future growth. So it'll give you some planning that you might want to do this for all of your different types and apply it as necessary. Okay, so I'm just going to create some here that we can generate, and then I'm going to do resource records, which is a new one. And let's just do. All right, so now I have these generic user-definable templates. And what I want to do now is basically set up different types of user-defined fields which would be applied to, say, subnets, IP addresses, and other data. So what I want to do in this particular case, because I have several different ways of looking at data, we might have owner, which we might want to tie back to a text field, and in that we might want to have this applied to containers for sites, IPs, maybe down to the resource record and even subnets, as an example of where to apply it. So it's a create once, apply many. And let's just do a couple others here. I'm going to do POC name. Now the field name tag and the display title that you see, the display is how it appears in the display in this web UI as you start to assign it. The field name tag is how we refer to it in imports, APIs, and other programmatic means. So it always needs to follow some type of database integrity in terms of its naming. It can have underscores. It cannot have spaces and other types of values that are invalid at a table, control characters, things along those lines. So I typically recommend, just for remembrance sake, because as you grow this, you might forget what the display name and the field name tag is if you don't have some type of naming structure. So I always put in particularly the name of the exact name, all lowercase with the underscore separating spaces. And that helps me know that if it's POC name, I understand it's POC underscore name lowercase. And I'm going to pretty much run this across here everywhere. So this is our point of contact. And we'll just apply that everywhere. Let me make sure that owner's one word, so we kept that there. And now let's do POC email. One more, and we'll just apply that everywhere. So point of contact for everything. And then I want to do VLAN. Actually, let's do, VLAN. We'll just do VLAN here. And that will be specific to the subnets, really. We don't have it in many other cases here. But now what you may also want to have is you might want to put in things like contacts, locations, address, things like city, state, if you want to track down to that particular level. And you might want to track that by container or and let it be defined in one location, or you can do it at the subnet as well. However, it could, of course, you could look at the container, see is fields. So alternatively, you might want to pick and choose where those are applied again. And I'm going to do just a couple others here, just so we know how that's done. Actually, I wanted to do that container. And let's do city. And we'll do state region in case you're global and don't have particularly a state. And then we'll have postal code. Let's do this. Postal code. And let's do one last one. Notes. And we can make this a text area, and we can then apply that to the subnets VLAN. There we go. All right. So now we've got some basic fields. Now, one thing I do want to show within the information templates, now that these are defined, if we were to go back, say, at the container level, you'll note that these are all in a particular order, which you can shuffle up or down as needed and or delete it from the template, not removing it from the field. And then you can also enable or disable the list display, meaning that in the various container list views and then also in the subnet list views, you can dictate whether these fields are displayed at that particular level. And so what we want to do here, and I want to do one more here, and I'm going to go find it. Okay, I want to add that. I want to add one more field to it here. I thought I added it. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, there it is. Oh, so I need to go to this other here. That was under containers. I want to do it under subnets. So under the information, the subnet UDF, then I want to have this display the notes and the VLAN. That's what I want within the display. All right. So then when we go back and take a look at our containers, of course, we don't have anything at this point but they would appear here in this list, and they would be broken out to show us the notes in the VLAN. Okay, now I don't have anything assigned, so we're going to come back and we're going to do this. But the next part of this is how those information templates get defined elsewhere. So I'm going to go down into the subnet level here and edit the container, and in the block type information templates, it'll list all of your different block types, all the different block types where this can be applied. So what we want to do here is I want to select the subnet for the private data, which is the only one I have at the subnet level, and define that at this level for those fields. Now I could, and without having to save that off, I could go also through the different IP devices, but I haven't assigned any fields yet. But I could say, just because they're there, go ahead and predetermine that all of the devices will have a device template. And I'll just kind of tab and hit the D key as I go through this to simplify it. Okay, but that is effectively how we assign it. Now at the region level, I might then want to have the block type information for the region block, and this might be the network UDF because that's, contact, things like it. And in the container maintenance itself, when I look at the container like Atlanta, where I'm at, I might have then, here's a template, and when I select that template, here are the different user-definable fields dynamically available. Now I can also control-click to do multiple templates if you wanted to have those visible. And then they become either optional or required based on the template configuration. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to submit this to save it, just so we keep it. And in the southeast, we have our blocks here for our network, which we should have. We don't really need anything location here, but you might want to have some other fields that are defined at that level as well. Okay, so that's pretty much how the information templates are set up, the user-definable fields. Once those are defined, and if you want to do things like searching in subnet blocks, there's a field that you can do searches on in each of these different categories, and same thing with our APIs. And we can then pick and choose which of these fields and we want to do a search with. So if I had, V101 as a name, I could say whether this contains as an exact match or begins with. So now that these fields are defined, and this is why I kind of define the VLAN as a field here as a UDF, it makes it searchable throughout all of the different screens and APIs, although we do other options for this as well. So that's how that information then gets collected. And now when we get down into the address pool allocation templates, these are going to be defined typically based on the known IP addresses or reservations in a subnet when the subnet's first created. So effectively, it's a template. And we can go in and set up individual objects, and we could say this is static, and we're going to go to the first offset. So now here's some quick math for everyone. The offset is based on the subnet and the available IP addresses, and 1 is the first usable IP address up to the last usable IP address based on the mask. So for variable length subnets where you don't know the size or based on this initially, you can tell it to do the beginning of the subnet and tell it from the end. So I could tell it 50 from, or I won't say 50, but I could say 25 from the end of the subnet in terms of its range. Now that's not a good range for me, but so 1, that's how you can do it if you want to look the end, beginning end, and do this as a pool or something. From an individual address, I do 1 and 1 in the beginning of the subnet. I want to create a resource record. I want to create a router device. And I can say that this is the default gateway. Now I need to set a name for the router host naming so that it ensures it creates a custom name every time. And I don't know that I had one, but it should be there. So we can say the first one device is the first address. The next, I can say that this is going to be reserved. And we can say the starting offset is 2, and we might want to say to 10 at the beginning of the subnet. And that these are going to be we might have a device in here that is network device or some other type of device. We might want to say these are pre-reserved for network equipment. Okay. Now, with reserved IP devices, we cannot create DNS records because they are reserved. So until we statically define them, that DNS entry won't be available to us. So we'll just create a range effectively. Here, then, we can go ahead and we can say create a pool, tell it that it's dynamic DHCP. We're going to start at 50 from the beginning, and we're going to tell it 10 from the end. And we're going to tell it that these are, unspecified and a pool, right? And we might even have some last things like firewalls or even routers or, some other types of devices at the very end of the subnet. And again, we could go in and say if this is the end, this might be a firewall, and this will be the end of the subnet. So this is effectively how we create the address pool allocation template. I need to give it a name. And what we're going to call this, and what I recommend doing this, is something like subnet-size. So I might want to say subnet-24. This is applicable. For a smaller subnet of 28, 29, 26, that would, of course, might be modified. However, based on the offsets, if there are available IP addresses to match, like the pool size, so if we were a 23, 22, 21, we could still use the same type template and it would pre-allocate within the first portion of the ranges. So it could be reused in different sizes, but I recommend giving it some type of size just for that purpose. Since that's the default, we might want to do that there. So you might have others here where you'll do subnet/22, subnet/23, subnet/24, and so forth. Okay, we require an entry, but in that case, we'll just use it. Now, that information then, when we go to look at subnets, and I'm going to just create a subnet, and in the subnet allocation, we're going to assume a 24 in this particular case. I'm going to scroll down, and this is in the allocation template where that offset begins. Now, when we start dealing with DHCP, it also needs to have the subnet policies that tell it what DHCP server, since we're telling it that there's a scope. So we must come over here and tell it to do this, and it looks like we have the same thing here where it'll automatically fill in once that's defined. Now, in terms of the subnet, as I mentioned before, it automatically tries to determine the next best fit for this allocation. And in this particular case here, and contiguously, the 23 is the next available. We'll split it, we'll use one portion of it, save the next, and then we'll tell it to continue. I can fill in my user-definable field since I told it that the data type has these field names. And I'm going to say this is, David Cross. And David signallabs.com. All right, and we're going to say V101 just because we did, and this is the notes where you can give additional details. All right, very simple there. The policies, again, you would give it its gateway if you were going to assess something within the blocks. We know that this is now going to be 10.10.2. And I'm going to tell it just one because that's there. And from the policy sets, again, if I wanted to do anything with the existing leases that we had, or if I wanted to include a subnet-specific option set or a standard option set, I could go ahead and apply those details at this time. Now, of course, if you're going to use different option sets, the standard one has all of the subnet level specifics. Any custom level options, you either have a different template or you would do subnet specific. So there's different classes that you would use it in. But go ahead and set the other values here, just as you would in the other subnets that we did. And we'll go ahead and set these both to their, be resolvable in this case. But in that regard, this is how that information works. And what we hope to see is that it'll go out and create all of the IP addresses and that everything would be allowed. I already set this. So one note, and you'll see in this policy, it said it can't do a certain thing because I told it, in that template that the default gateway is number 1, but I tried to type it in. So effectively leave that empty if the template creates it for you, and then try to go ahead and use that. Now again, I didn't do some other things. So I've got to backtrack just a little bit. Okay, I added the firewall, but I didn't add a firewall policy, and so I mentioned as we're creating this, you want to have, if you're auto-creating the name, that you have something here that can fill that name in by default. That could be edited at a later time. And let's verify our router too, since we had that. Let's go ahead and do servers just while we're here. And again, I'm just going to do a very basic template. All right, let's go back to where we were. Let's go ahead and try this subnet template again. Add child, keep this. We can go ahead, I don't need to select it. I can let the next best fit work for me. This will fill in the IP automatically. And then here, I'll just tell it it's in use deployed. This is a subnet. And I can go down and fill in the rest of the details if I want. I'm going to go ahead and just do this, and we'll set the defaults here. And I believe that should work for us for everything we need. That'll create the subnet. That'll create the IP addresses for us. That'll create the range. And now I can see a quick view of this subnet, see how that's kind of defined with your legend. Here's a free space, static, reserves, and then the dynamic range. And then if I go into those subnets, you'll see the IP addresses. All right, so that is a very quick overview of the different template types that we use for, the user-defined fields, the IP addresses and naming and others. Now, once those are defined, we can kind of group those together into other templates, and that being the site template, which allows us to say things like this is a small branch. We're going to use a container type of logical, and I haven't given you any differences yet. We'll come back to that in another video. And in this particular template, what we want to do is tell it that this small branch has a private data block of IPv4 and a 24. We're just going to say it's one subnet. And it's going to have then the current status is in use deployed. We're going to tell it the allocation template, which we used previously. And we want to set our primary failover DHCP. Let's go ahead and set the policies. We'll set ISC standard and then our domains and servers. So this template, using this, allows us to put in basically the minimums. And then from there, we can tell it to save this template, create the subnet, and it'll create the next available and add those policies. So effectively now, if I go back to this container again, where before we did the add block, I could say now add site. And then this in the site would predefine all this information. I could fill in the other details here if I needed. And I could say other things like user definable fields and other data that you want entered. And then just submit the application. It'll go ahead and build the subnet or subnets, the user defined fields, the ranges, the scopes, and it uses the next available and it moves on through the list. And so for us, that's a great way for you to build templates of things in a cookie cutter nature where it's consistently the same and you work through it. And then you can append that to do any number of subnets. We can tell it to do v4, v6, and we could do any number of combinations of these. And it works really very well when you have the structured data, you have your own regional allocation, and you're controlling the flow of the data. Those policies and templates work every time. Just click the button and go. That also makes it available in APIs, which we'll talk about in a later topic as we get to that. Okay, so again, some high-level overviews, some things that we have for automation of the subnets, user-definable fields, information templates, and so on. So I'm going to leave it at that in this video, and I'm going to come back in the next, and we're going to go through some other capabilities with the containers, the cloning, exporting, and maybe talk on some discovery primarily in the next one. Thank you. See you in the next video.